a lot of people have to die. He goes, how many? We said, the whole family.
We said, we want to kill the whole family. And he stopped and he said, at the end of the meeting, it was a nice compromise, he said, only one. And we looked at each other and went, the little girl.
Welcome to our part 2 video for Poltergeist. This will be the biggest series on Poltergeist on the internet. So if you haven't seen the first part, you might miss a lot of points we're talking about in this video. So go back and watch that one first. Otherwise, let's continue. Night Skies was going to be the sequel for Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and it looked like it was on the road to being made. Columbia was on board to make the film, Spielberg planned to produce, a script was being written, and aliens were being designed by Rick Baker. Now Spielberg needed a director, and this leads us to Tobe Hooper. Tobe Hooper grew up with parents that owned a theater in San Angelo, and he would often make movies with his father's 8mm camera, starting at the age of 9. He went to college and dabbed in short films, but then he focused on being a college professor while he did documentary camera work on the side. Hooper then took the leap in 1974, making a movie in 7 days with a budget of $140,000. The film was based on monsters, and to Hooper, the monsters were humans, and that film was Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The film was beyond successful, making $30 million. Now, Hooper did not need to return to teaching, so he focused on film full-time. His next film, Eaten Alive, did fine, but his work on the Salem's Lot miniseries was considered his next big success. While he was making stuff at Universal, he took over the office of director Robert Wise, who not only made The Haunting, but Star Trek the Motion Picture. Hooper would find a book in Wise's desk about poltergeists, and he thought it would be a good movie idea. Apparently, Hooper worked with William Friedkin, who made The Exorcist and one of my favorites, Sorcerer, to help him convince Universal to greenlight a poltergeist project, but that never came to pass. Instead of making a poltergeist film, Universal asked Tobe to direct Funhouse, which turned into his next project. It was around this time that Steven Spielberg reached out to Tobe and sent him a script for Night Skies. But Tobe stated that kind of movie was not his thing. To Tobe, humans were the horror within films, and families were often oppressive elements. He suggested that they should turn Night Skies into a ghost story about a family that lived next to a graveyard. Now I need to take you down a different tangent because on September 7th, 1979, a script was registered with the Writers Guild West called Housebound. The script was the creation of an actor who aspired to be a writer named Paul Clemens, and he wrote this script with his buddy Bennett Michael Yellen. This script was specifically about a haunted house, and these are some of the elements in that script. It was about a family of 5, a mother, a father, an older daughter, a younger son, and a very young daughter. Their house traps the family, and the youngest daughter is kidnapped and held somewhere in the house by paranormal forces. There is a door frame in the house that turns into a throat-like orifice that has pink accents that tries to suck and swallow things in it. A tree comes to life and attacks the father, keeping the family trapped inside the house and unable to leave. The family can hear the daughter calling out within the house. The script specifically refers to an entity known as the Beast as a presence, and the line, "Don't let the beast know that it scares you," is used. There is a bath scene with a character and faucets that pour blood. At the end of the film, the mother would die in a closet, and the dead that are buried under the house would rise up out of the floors to retake the home while the family flees. There are other elements that were similar to Poltergeist that I haven't mentioned, but you get the idea. The Housebound script was sent to one production company in Hollywood on January 1980 by the writer's agent, and that studio was Steven Spielberg's production company, which would become officially Amblin Entertainment in 1980. Now, before anyone says Steven stole their script outright, let's look at the reality of Steven Spielberg's life at this time. The guy is busy, with often hundreds of employees on projects. He is in meetings with staff, whether producers, writers, and the like, and he has a lot of voices around him. He would receive sacks of fan mail weekly. And on top of that, everybody wanted to work with Steven Spielberg, to the point that some even threw their scripts at Steven Spielberg's car whenever he would drive away from his home. Steven specifically had people that went through his mail and scripts, and they either returned them as unsolicited, sent them to the Writers Guild, or suggested for Steven to read them, or they would simply discard them. There is a good bet Steven never saw this script. There were many hands in the pot around Steven, so these facts make it unfair to absolutely say one person did this or that. And I'm saying this as a neutral because at this channel we give you the facts and you decide for yourself. It's not my job to pronounce judgment. Another thing you need to take into account is that Hollywood borrows things from other projects. It's been going on since before Hollywood existed. If you need evidence of this, just look at the Alien series, as Alien 3 was cobbled together from various scripts, and Alien Resurrection was an amalgamation of a bunch of Alien 3 scripts as well. Prometheus was a riff off of AVP, and so on. It's everywhere if you look for it. Even writer Richard Matheson would later claim that Spielberg took his short story that turned into a Twilight Zone episode called Little Girl Lost, where a girl enters another dimension via her wall in a room.
Daddy, where are you? We're here, baby. We're here. We're right here. I can't see you.
He even claimed Spielberg expressed interest in making that episode into a film directly to Matheson. In the end, this is what he had to say. Well, Poltergeist was inspired by one of mine, and I never got credit for it. God, he must have felt guilty or something, because he hired me as a creative consultant on Amazing Stories, and I didn't do too well on that. I rejected 2 of his stories. Truthfully, Matheson should also claim Housebound stole his idea too. Matheson stated that the spooky tree in Poltergeist was based on an incident during his childhood, even though Steven Spielberg's sister would recant how Spielberg was terrified of a tree when growing up, and we showed that clip in our Part 1 video. The point is, claims of stealing come from every direction with big films or names, and there is always cross-pollination in most movie projects, whether conscious or subconscious. After all, a lot of directors pay homage to other directors who motivated them to go into filmmaking. However, I have to admit that the Housebound script and Poltergeist scripts have a lot of similarities that encourage suspicion. This is a common problem in Hollywood, and the truth is, proving it can be very harsh and unforgiving for those going against big directors or studios, and then you have to prove who took what, and in Spielberg's case, there were a lot of folks around him. In the end, this is something you will have to make judgments for yourself. Despite all this, in the future, you will see how the script of Housebound will haunt, pun intended, the validity of Poltergeist. Ironically, 2 months after this script was sent to Spielberg's production company, a treatment for a haunted house movie began by Steven and trusted colleagues. This treatment was a result of collaborations with Tobe Hooper, Frank Marshall, and Kathleen Kennedy. The ghost story would become an 11-page treatment called Nighttime, dated March 31st, 1980. This treatment had the Freelings with 4 children, and they live in a community that surrounds a mall. No one gets kidnapped in this treatment, but the ghosts do possess people, and in one scene, Steve is possessed while he is having sex with his wife, and she loves it. This treatment sounds very Tobe Hooper rather than Steven Spielberg. The treatment was rough, more ideas than story. Steven had to put the idea of a ghost movie on hold, though, as it was time for him to film Raiders of the Lost Ark in June 1980. Thus, Nighttime was worked on whenever Steven had the time, which was not abundant. During this period, Hooper kept at the ghost idea, and the more Steven thought about it, the more he wanted to turn Night Skies into Poltergeist, as Hooper suggested. However, Columbia Pictures was expecting a sequel sequel to Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and Steven needed to at least offer that to them because he had informed Columbia that he was working on that concept specifically. So Steven had to go through with an Alien film to meet studio expectations. During August 1980, as the filming of Raiders of the Lost Ark was going on, Steven kept working on his nighttime treatment. Tobe and Steven corresponded through the mail about ideas on the treatment. By August 23, 1980, the title had changed to It's Nighttime. The August story treatment was about a husband and a wife that lived in the suburbs with 4 kids. They were named the Freelings. The ghosts in this version are white settlers that were murdered during the 1800s by Indians. In this treatment, the oldest Freeling daughter is obsessed by a record with pioneer songs, and this somehow stirs the dead to emerge in the form of stuff moving around by itself. A woman being assaulted by a ghost, and the dead rising up in a pool. Tajina, voices in the television, the suburb theme, and the family are all elements in the movie. A makeshift ending had the entire community plagued by ghosts by the end of the movie. Everyone in the area evacuates as ghost fire burns the community to the ground. I also need to note, since we mentioned Housebound, that it is specifically noted in court documents that Kathleen Kennedy suggested that faucets dispense blood in the house, a story point that was in Clemens and Yellen's submitted Housebound script. This doesn't mean Kennedy was guilty of stealing material, but it does reflect how Steven would add things to his story with input from others. Steven was a very collaborative creator, and when you do this, you can sometimes find yourself, especially in the copyright world, clueless to the origin of ideas from others. Right after finishing his treatment, Steven felt a little worn out. He was writing horror films about ghosts and planning on making a film about hostile aliens, and he was currently filming a movie with Nazis being melted or getting their face blown up. He missed the magic and innocence of his earlier films, and he wanted to get back to that. Sometime around August or September, Spielberg showed Melissa Matheson the script for Night Skies. Melissa teared up over the relationship between Buddy the alien and Jaybird the autistic boy, and she said that is the story elements that should be focused on. So Melissa began writing the script for a film called E.T. and Me, the movie that would eventually become E.T. It was at this point that Night Skies began to die. Elements of Night Skies was now going into Melissa's E.T. script, and Steven set his sights on directing a fresh and friendly E.T. film rather than a dark one. When filming ended for Raiders, Spielberg took some time to confab with Melissa Matheson about her E.T. script. He was liking what he saw, and he decided to pitch E.T. to Columbia as the sequel for Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Melissa would finish the E.T. script in October 1980, within 8 weeks from starting the project. Steven considered the first draft perfect, but she would continue to tweak drafts up until mid-1981. With an acceptable script, Steven finally pitched E.T. to Columbia Pictures. But Columbia thought his idea was kiddie stuff, with little potential. Columbia officially stated E.T. was a wimpy Walt Disney movie. Honestly, they were dealing with Steven Spielberg during 1981. The guy has made some of the biggest films ever. If he says he wants to make a movie about a banana peel, you say yes. Spielberg was so angry towards the CEO of Columbia for refusing his film so callously that the director stated the CEO should cease to exist, and he cut ties with Columbia. He also put in his contracts for any future projects that Steven was exempt from dealing with Frank Price for any future projects to whatever studio he was with. This forward-thinking clause served Spielberg well when Price moved to Universal during 1983 to 1986. Naturally, Steven did not work directly with him during that time. Instead of working with Columbia, Spielberg went to an old friend, Sid Sheinberg, at Universal, and the movie was fast-tracked for filming in September 1981. The movie would go on to become the biggest film of all time during 1982, making Columbia look stupid in retrospect. With Steven's ghost treatment still a focus, Spielberg approached writer Stephen King to make a screenplay, but King's publisher asked for insane fees. So Spielberg searched for other writers. At the time, Steven was talking with two writers named Michael Grayus and Mark Victor, who he was in talks with to remake A Guy Named Joe, which would eventually become Always during 1989. The writers were intrigued about writing a ghost film, and so they actively pursued that concept, and Steven eventually hired them to write a draft, and Tobe was still attached to the project. Writer Michael Grayus would later say, "Tobe's Texas Chainsaw Massacre was the scariest film I'd ever seen up to that point in time. I thought, whoa, Spielberg must want to go hardcore horror on this one. In order to make this film really different, a la Tobe Hooper, we had to kill many of the family members. Spielberg recoiled at that idea, but said we could pick one person to die, and we said Carol Ann. He told us, smiling, we were sick, but to proceed. We didn't kill her, obviously, and this solution to killing her, having her disappear into another dimension, came about in conversations with Spielberg." The writers also stated, "We weren't really working with Spielberg because he was on E.T. When they did see him, it was during meetings at the MGM commissary." And why were they at the MGM commissary? Well, because Steven pitched Night Skies to MGM as Poltergeist, and MGM picked up the contract. And this is where officially Night Skies became Poltergeist. In early 1981, the first draft of Poltergeist was completed, and on the script, it noted that the film's title was formally It's Nighttime. The problem was the writers were too focused on making a script geared for Tobe Hooper and not Steven Spielberg. Spielberg was not a shock and gore director at this time, and when he saw it, he was very unhappy with it. It was gruesome, with neighbor Ben having his head crushed by the family station wagon as they fled during the end. Dana would get trapped in a bathtub filled with blood, and Mother Diane getting graphically raped by a ghost. Spielberg had to act fast. A writer's strike was looming in California, and he desperately wanted to get the script right because Poltergeist was now scheduled for filming in early May 1981, while doing a speedy 7-day rewrite with many voices helping with the script. Spielberg asked Kathleen Kennedy and Frank Marshall to move into his house as he didn't want to be alone while rewriting the script. Tobe Hooper also came around, but that didn't mean he took Tobe's advice, because Tobe wanted an actual creature to come out of the closet to get the kids. But Spielberg chose to turn the closet into a throat-like creature. Spielberg would later claim during July 1982 that he did the rewrites himself, but this is simply not true, as the producers and director were with him, and during mornings he would read them what he wrote the day before, and they gave him feedback. This wasn't a solo project. The editor of Fangoria magazine claimed that sources on Spielberg's payroll claimed there was a total of 8 uncredited ghostwriters who worked on the Poltergeist script, and it was suggested that close collaborative friends like Hal Barwood and Matthew Robbins were among some of those writers. This is what Fangoria magazine's late editor, Robert Martin, stated publicly. There were never 8 people working on the script at once, but there were uncredited writers working on the script after Grayus and Victor. After it had been scheduled for production, causing a great rush to get the script in shape, this is when I believe there were unauthorized borrowings. My source for this sort of info was a number of personal friends who were on Spielberg's payroll at the time who spoke in confidence. Finally, during February 1981, Spielberg's revised first draft was finished. Now, for time's sake, we're going to do something different for the channel. We cover all early material for a movie so you can see the evolution of a film. But in order to compress the differing evolutions of Poltergeist, we want to jump right to the movie novelization that was based specifically off this script. You might be asking, why would I do this? Well, it's real simple. James Caan wrote this novel very fast in Steven Spielberg's office, and he answered to Amblin Entertainment directly while he had this job. Caan spoke with Steven Spielberg about the story often and asked if he could add backstories to the science team in Tangina. Steven allowed all these story extensions and approved everything in the book. It is a great companion to the film, and rather than cover it later, I'm going to meld the script and book together now because we have tons to cover during filming, marketing, and release. At the beginning of the tale, Tweety has died, and the family is getting ready for Robbie's birthday party. Guests enter the house, and the dads are together watching a football game, while the kids are playing Pin the Tail on the Donkey and other such games. Carol Ann is too young to take part, so she looks to her dad and asks him if he wants to hear about her dreams. And this is when Dad can't pay attention to her because the neighbor's remote is messing up the football game. During the party, there's a scavenger hunt, and Robbie is looking around the house for his prize. He goes outside, looks through some bricks, and something bites him. As he digs away the bricks, he's disturbed to see his clown there, which should be in his bedroom chair, and he hates this clown. And I have to admit, I would hate it too if I was his age. Who the hell gives you this? Anyways, before he can tell anyone about this situation, screaming occurs in the house, and it's Carol Ann. Everyone runs upstairs to find her screaming at a television that has nothing on it but static. The party then ends. During dinner time, we see the family dynamic. Dana wants to go to her friend's house. Steve says she can't because she hasn't finished her geometry homework. So she turns to Diane for help, and Diane says if she finishes her homework, they will see. During the dinner, Carol Ann says she had a dream about ghosts and proceeds to tell everyone she was in a part with lots of people who wanted to be around her, and they wore clothes like she saw in old scrapbooks that belonged to Grandma. However, all the ghosts around her stay away from her because the other ghosts are afraid of the old man near her. The next day, Diane is at a PTA meeting, and she runs into a friend, and she expresses concern that Carol Ann started sleepwalking a few weeks ago, and that's when her friend suggests she sees a sleep specialist, and she can help get her in touch with him. Diane accepts. That night, the scene where Diane comes into the room and tucks her kids into bed occurs. Diane turns on the closet light while Robbie covers up his clown doll with his coat. Then Diane and Steve are in their room smoking a doobie, and Diane worries over Carol Ann's sleepwalking. Then a storm occurs. Robbie's scared, and his father teaches him how to count during the storm, but it doesn't work. The storm rages, and the tree scrapes the outside of the house, seemingly taunting the kids in their beds. And then the kids think the tree is hit by lightning, and in a frenzy, the tree raises its arms up to the sky. The kids then run out of their room and head to the parents. This is when Steve sees them and says, "Okay, everybody in bed for a camp-in. What do you want to watch? Superman or Dallas?" Like the film, Carol Ann wakes up to the static television and she speaks to it. Then the ghostly hand appears before heading into the wall above the bed. The next morning, the construction workers are in the backyard working on the pool, and the neighbor Ben complains about the noise. Steve is clearing out the tree limb that was hit by lightning, and the neighbor tells Freeling he should have cut down that tree a long time ago. Steve simply tolerates the rude neighbor. Inside, the kids have the exact same busy breakfast like the film, where Robbie's glass breaks and Carol Ann tries to watch static on the kitchen television. We are then in a doctor's office. Diane speaks to the sleep disorder specialist, Dr. Brenner. She states when Carol Ann sleepwalks, she has ended up in a bathtub sleeping, tearing off leaves off of plants. But most of the time, she sits in front of a television talking to it. The doctor states that sleepwalking is a common disorder. When Carol Ann is brought in, she recalls how, in her dreams, there is a fire-like bird that sometimes carries her in the dream and then drops her while laughing. She also talks about the many people around her in the dream who go about their business wearing old clothes. Some look like bright lights. Some want to interact with Carol Ann and others don't. Back at home, E-Buzz wants to play with the wall and Diane tries to clean the wall stain, but it doesn't go away and there's a musty smell to the mark. When she goes downstairs, the dog starts barking at chairs, and Diane notices a broken bottle of preserves on the floor. Diane asks Carol Ann if she did this, and she says no. Diane doesn't believe her and spanks her. Then Diane goes to the broom closet as Carol Ann is crying, and when she comes out, the chairs are all stacked on top of the table. This is when Diane realizes she was wrong to spank Carol Ann and asks her if it was the TV people. We then cut to Steve, showing a house and talking about the community where we see he believes in the area and the job that he does. We then meet Dr. Lesh, who enters her lab where Marty and Ryan are. They are going over results over their test subject, Tangina. They are trying to prove that she is psychic with her equipment and trying to scientifically define the elements that make her this way. Ryan thinks she's faking it and suggests they cut her loose, and it's debated if she's real or not. Lesh argues that Tangina is very frustrated and doesn't want this gift, and she wouldn't be here unless her sister forced her to be here. And Tangina sees her power as an ailment, and she seeks a cure for it rather than using it for attention. So they're going to keep studying her. Tonight they will run more tests on her. Ryan acquiesces and says that it's only his education, to which a voice at the door says, "It's only my life, Mr. Mitchell." Then Tangina states she could care less if they believe in her, just as long as they can stop some of the dreams that plague her so she can sleep again. Then we're back at the Freeling house where Steve can't comprehend the phenomenon with the chair. He states that no one can go in the kitchen, and to deal with dinner, they talk about ordering pizza, and the pizza they specifically want to order is Pizza Hut, to which Steven says he hates Pizza Hut, and we will go more into this quote in a later video. They then go to the neighbors to see if they've seen anything strange, but of course they haven't. This emboldens Steve to keep things private because he felt like a fool asking the neighbors about this weird stuff. Diane says they can't ignore it and points out that the spot on the wall is getting bigger, and it wasn't there yesterday. The stain is also starting to appear in the kid's closet. Thus, on the other side of this stain will be the entryway into the netherworld later. Then that night, Robbie is taken by the tree, while Carol Ann is abducted into the closet. They look for her just like the movie, and then Robbie hears Carol Ann in the television. We then cut to Tangina in the lab being tested. She falls asleep, and they are monitoring her, and the team debates her abilities. Then as she dreams, the devices go nuts as Tangina squirms, and out of her mouth comes a child's voice saying, After some moments, Tangina wakes up and collapses into Lesh's arms. When she finally recovers, Tangina insists that they have to help a young girl that is trapped in another dimension, and Lesh doesn't know what she's talking about. Tangina gets more animated, saying they have to help a family, and in order to help this family, they need to find them. So she wants to go in a van with equipment and act like a radar to find them. Lesh eventually caves to the idea, and on the next night, they try the experiment where Tangina acts like a compass. Their journey takes them straight to the Freelings' home, where Tangina collapses and is subsequently sent to the hospital to rest. The Freelings are shocked to find these people at their door, and when asked about strange occurrences, Diane is very open to Dr. Lesh's presence. Like the film, the family is disheveled and exhausted, and Diane is very thankful they came, stating that the hand of God brought these people to their house. Steve is out of his wits and does not want to advertise what's going on in their home. The scientists then offer to investigate their home like the film. Like the movie, they're given a tour of the house and see the spirits in the bedroom. And then they have the discussion at the table where the coffee pot moves. The next day, during lunch, Dana is in her high school cafeteria talking to her friends about her crazy family. She purports that Carol Ann is hiding somewhere in the house and pretending to be lost, and that her parents are going along with it. She notes that the house is spooky now, and she thinks she's hearing sounds because their parents are so paranoid. It's really annoying her. Later that day, when she comes home, equipment is being set up. Dana comes downstairs with a packed bag, intending to go to her friend's house for the weekend. When Diane wants to introduce Dana to the scientist, she says she has to go, and then she leaves the house. Then the scene with the family calling Carol Ann occurs. The items drop from the ceiling, and then Marty suggests that a CB transmitter might be in the house, and he wants to check it out. Marty heads upstairs, starting with Dana's room. He looks everywhere for a CB, including including her closet, where he finds marijuana that belongs to the teen. Then he goes into the master bedroom and finds nothing. Then he goes into a bathroom and discovers a cabinet door won't open. Then he gets down on the floor to use his feet to get leverage. And when he starts putting pressure on the door, something on the other side of the door growls. It sounds huge. Shaken, the man gets up and goes into the hall, leaving the door alone. He then is frustrated by himself that he's falling for these things in this house and believes it's all a hoax. So he decides to unlock the children's door in an attempt to prove this is all a hoax. But as he tries to do so, a putrid smell occurs and something lifts him off the ground and bites him. Then the scene with Carol Ann going through Diane occurs. Marty shows everyone the bite, and Robbie is educated by Lesh about the afterlife. Everyone goes to sleep, and Marty goes for food in the kitchen. Then he has a moment where he doesn't like his face and tries to get a new one. And when that's over, he tries to leave the kitchen, but he can't because something is holding him in place. In a positively horrid scene, spiders swarm Marty, entering his nose and other areas. Then rats come and eat him alive before worms manifest themselves beneath his fingertips. It is really gross and disturbing. And the scene ends when Marty is completely consumed by the insects as he experiences what decomposition is like as he stands next to the refrigerator. In the living room, the ghosts appear descending down the steps, and Marty finds himself with the others as if waking from a nightmare from the kitchen. The ghosts would move into the ceiling like the film, but then another ghost or entity comes down the stairs. This one is dark and foreboding and moves stuff randomly. This entity then begins responding to another flaming entity, and then a third one that looks like a tree begins interacting with these spirits. They seem to be fighting or feuding. Marty runs into the bathroom terrified. He locks the door behind him. In a really weird twist, Marty begins melting in the John, literally. And while this is occurring, he grows talons and turns into something inhuman. In the living room, the spirits still seem to be dancing or fighting each other, while Marty exits the bathroom transformed as some inhuman thing. This is when a woman spirit comes down the steps gracefully, shining light, and everything in the area seems to calm. However, all the lights in the room grow really bright before totally turning dark, and at that moment everything is back to normal. Marty is fine. There are no spirits in the room. Then they watch the videotape footage where they see countless people. Some are very specific, like a baby crying, and there are even two men who are actually stabbing each other eternally in the afterlife. Lesh locks the tapes in her suitcase. The next morning, Robbie leaves for Grandma's, and Lesh states Marty won't be coming back. In this version, Lesh reveals that the jewelry was dated, and they're quite old. Meanwhile, Steve's boss appears, and the same discussion occurs like the film. Then there's a scene that very much resembled the 1982 film The Entity. Diane is snoring asleep, while an invisible presence begins touching her skin and opening her legs while grunting. Finger indents occur all over her body, and she is so tired she doesn't wake up. Meanwhile, Steve is on the hill, where his boss tells him about moving the cemetery, and is trying to tempt him with the next phase of their housing project. It is then that Tangina wakes up in the hospital. She has been sleeping straight for 24 hours. A doctor comes in to diagnose her and asks what she's been up to, and she says strangling a she-ghoul in the lavender ties of the 12th astral plane. The doctor asks if she's been taking drugs, because he can't take her seriously. But then she shows him a taste of her abilities by reading his mind. The doctor is stunned, and Tangina flirts with him before he leaves. Then, while in the hallway, a stranger comes up to Tangina asking for a seance, which she declines as she is tired of being a medium. When Tangina returns to her room, she focuses on Carol Ann and goes into a trance. Tangina astral projects into the spirit realm. She finds Carol Ann surrounded by spirits, and for the moment, the nasty spirit is away. Tangina tells Carol Ann to go to the light. She tells her not to look at the light or even go into it, but to wait for her mother there. because the bad spirit hates that light, and she will be safe. Carol Ann obeys. Then Tangina awakes to a flood of medical staff around her, trying to revive her. They thought she was dead, and Tangina states she's fine. Back at the college, Dr. Lesh presents her findings to the board, and they're not impressed, mainly because they are self-indulgent intellectuals without the ability to have an open mind. Frustrated, she goes to her confidant, Dr. Farrow, and he encourages her to keep at it. From there, Dr. Lesh visits Tangina, who is insistent they go to the Freeling's house and help the girl. Lesh says they will, as soon as the doctors release her. Then Lesh returns to the Freeling's house where the parents and Ryan await. Tangina does get discharged, but before she leaves, she astral projects into the spirit world again, this time to face the beast. The beast described in the book version is really weird. Tangina forces it to reveal its name, which is Gahala, and it is literally like a beast, hissing and growling. She basically taunts the creature, keeping it away from Carol Ann. At the Freeling house, a spirit starts talking through the television, but the spirit is not Carol Ann. Shortly after, Tangina arrives, and Lesh scolds Tangina that she's in no condition to face this house, to which Tangina says she's in no condition not to. We then have the scenes in the movie, where the parents are introduced to Tangina, Steve tries to communicate mentally to her, and then she tells them that they are facing a beast. The kids' room is entered, the tennis balls checked, and then Carol Ann is saved, and Tangina's final line is,
"This house is clean."
The next morning, Dr. Lesh visits her colleague, Dr. Farrow, and she sums up the events stating that whatever was going on in that house, it's over with, and that they're now going to research all the material they gathered. However, she doesn't have confidence that they're going to make sense of it. Back at the house, the entire family is back together eating breakfast, and there are tons of boxes as they are moving out. Things proceed like the final film. The kids are in their room as Steve goes to the office to wrap things up. Dana goes to say goodbye to friends. Diane takes a bath. The clown tries to play with Robbie, and a ghost tries to get frisky with Diane. But Diane likes them older, so she jumps in the pool to swim with the ancients before getting to the kids' room. The kids' room turns into a sarlacc pit, complete with slow tentacles, and Diane saves them. Before they can escape the house, the dead start popping up out of the floor because they're jealous of the dead that got to swim with Joe Beth, and I would be one of them. That's when Steve returns home, and the family gets out of there before the house swallows itself. As the car drives away, Robbie is actually punching away undead that are still clinging to the car. In the last scene at the hotel, the television is thrown out of the room and the door is slammed shut. However, in this version, the television rolls away from the room as if it's moving itself. Now, this early script and the novel add a lot of elements to the film. Though, honestly, I believe the film we got was very tight, and the ambiguity of the beast was best left unexplored, as that made it more ominous. Now, with the script ready to go, it was time for the film to get actors. And in our next video, we will cover the rest of the behind the scenes for this film. And as we stated in our last video, we will continue to shout out channel member Paul Bennell's movie, A Blind Bargain, which will hit selected theaters in April. For this video, Paul gave us an exclusive clip, so here's a small taste of that film. And in our next video, we will have more insights about this movie.
Joy, you're going on a cosmic trip to be a star again. I ask you, from the tides of life, like learned from futile rage.
If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. Super thanks helps, and so does sharing. We're really glad you were here. Thanks.